The Modernist. The grid provides you with a structure to align the site elements with, and a framework. Grids are by nature very regular and consistent, and this helps make it easier for you to make your web page look easy to read and logically fit together without too much deep thought required on your part. You end up with a more balanced looking, nicely flowing final product much more easily. Remember back in grade school when you made posters for class? The grid layout is helpful for kind of like that. If you start out with just a blank poster like this and then start pasting things on, you may have had experiences with rather sloppy work. That's why the overachiever kids would go out and either buy a gridded poster board, or they would even draw on the grid themselves sometimes, I've seen, so that they could line up all the elements they wanted to put on their poster and make them look very even. Today, web pages use the grid system for a similar reason. It's easier to read if elements are put together so that they'll be nicely grouped and aesthetically pleasing to the viewer. This page, Wattpad, if you'll notice, uses the grid system, a variation of these square sizes here, these rectangles, all up and down the whole page. You can scroll up and down and you'll see all the different sections of topics that you can look through or click on, nicely laid out into this format. Something you're probably even more familiar with is online shopping. An example should be showing up soon. Quite. This is the Apple Store website. They have at the top a really simple header that shows different topics or things that you can shop for really quick, with their search bar if you know exactly what you want to find. And then in the center, which is the most visually accessible part of a page, they have big bright pictures of things that you can look at that you might want to buy. And on both of the sides of the page, there are suggestions for other things that you might want to look at too. So how would you use a grid system or a graph, which you probably usually think of in terms of math, to make a web page? A simple example is using the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is a rule in art that if you want something to look really stand out to your viewer, be interesting and captivating, it works to have your image split into 9 equally sized sections, separated by 2 equally spaced horizontal and vertical lines, kind of like a tic-tac-toe board, where any elements that you want to put inside go along the edges of the lines or at the intersection points. You may have noticed that people don't always stick with that in a website, so it's usually a variation, sort of like something like this, where there might be a headline, 2 or 3 columns, 3 like you saw in the Apple Store one, and at the bottom maybe links of interest or ways to contact. The 960 grid system is based on a width of 960 pixels, and it's made to streamline web development by easily splitting up, like this, the pixels of your screen or your page into sections based on ideal ratios. That's why the number 960 was chosen, because it's divisible by 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, and 16, so on, which you might know from math is the golden ratio. This helps you to experiment with different widths and arrangements for your layout pretty easily. A good example of the use of the grid system is Food Network. They have their big header that catches your eye and all those important topics that you might want to look into. And in the centered part, the biggest column that you're most likely to see, they have visually appealing pictures of the desserts and recipes that you should try to cook. On the side, they have advertisements and other tips for if you're interested. News websites often use a grid system because they have to fit a lot of information into their pages. So here's an example of CNN where the headline news is the biggest thing at the top, front, and center of the page, other than, of course, the header, as usual, which has all the different places you can go in their site. And on the side, both sides, are just other headlines that you can look into, or the weather forecast and things like that. This is the website for the medical school at Dartmouth University, and it also uses the grid system. Here is their mission statement and all the tabs you can go to for different pieces of information on their school. And this is sort of a scrolling banner that shows different current events and pieces of information. And down here are more sections on things of interest for visitors to the site. So, if you use the grid system, you are a step closer to having an easy, fast, nice looking web page design.